Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video. We are going to be going over a bunch of players that are absolutely exploding at the perfect time, right into your fantasy playoffs. This is the exact consistency that you want to see out of these players. So without further ado, we're going to get into it. But first, I want you guys to be hitting that like button, of course, if you do enjoy at the end, and also hitting that subscribe button. First person up on this list is going to be AMON-RA St. Brown. AMON-RA St. Brown has been going absolutely crazy these past couple of weeks. If we take a look here, past 4 weeks, 22.1, 15.0, 27.9, and then 34.6. This is exactly what you expected when you drafted AMON-RA. Maybe your wide receiver 1, maybe your wide receiver 2, depending on where he fell to in the draft or depending on your roster spots. But listen, this guy is carrying you right now, and just let it ride, baby. Let AMON-RA take you to the promised land. I don't really expect Jameson Williams to get the full workload maybe until week 15, 16. So you got about a week, maybe 2 weeks more of just AMON-RA domination, you would hope. Their schedule is also looking pretty easy, except for the New York Jets in week 15. Other than that, you got the Minnesota Vikings, Carolina Panthers, Chicago Bears here. These are all teams that you can pass against, and I'd expect the domination for AMON-RA to continue. Keep it up, keep riding with AMON-RA, baby. Sun God is killing it for you. Next person or persons on this list, I'm gonna go with Tony Pollard. If I had to pick one of them, we're going with Tony Pollard and Zeke, but I'm gonna spotlight Tony Pollard here. All right, the past 5 weeks for Tony Pollard: 33.7, 21.8, 36.9, 8.1, and then 24.6. That's 4 out of the last 5 weeks that he's been over 20 fantasy points. That's ridiculous numbers for a quote-unquote backup running back to Ezekiel Elliott. I know he started a couple of these games. I totally understand that. But then if we swap it over to Zeke, you're still loving the production from Zeke. So it's incredible that the Dallas offense can sustain 2 fantasy relevant running backs in this offense. Like, you're loving what you're seeing. Even if you got screwed over all year with Zeke and you really weren't loving what he was giving you, how can you not like what you're seeing now out of him? 2 guys that are producing on this offense. You would hope for that to continue. The matchups don't really suggest that it, will fade away, at least until, maybe Philadelphia in week 16 and then Tennessee in week 17. But next 2 weeks against Houston and Jacksonville, I mean, they just absolutely stomped the Indianapolis Colts. I mean, stomped. This was just a massacre. We could see more domination from Zeke and Pollard in these upcoming weeks, and they're turning it up at the perfect time, like I said. Next guy on this list is somebody that hasn't really been producing all year the way you would have hoped, but he's turning it up, and he seems to be taking back that starting role. If you haven't already figured it out, it's DeAndre Swift here. Just dropped 21.1 fantasy points against the Jacksonville Jaguars, and you are rejoicing. If you've been holding on to DeAndre Swift, I mean, unless you traded him, you're probably still holding on to him and just holding on for dear life at this moment. It's been a roller coaster of a season for this guy, but hopefully he's springing back into that starting role. Same schedule as AMON-RA going forward, pretty favorable except for the New York Jets here. So I would expect it to continue, and you really want to see DeAndre Swift take back that starting role, take back the red zone role, and then I would be feeling very confident riding this guy into your in and out of your fantasy playoffs, hopefully as the champion in your league. Next up is a guy that's just a freak of nature. All right, I don't usually talk about the huge name guys like on these lists, but I gotta mention Davante Adams. The past 5 weeks here: 36.6, 27.6, 33.1, 14.4, and 37.7. 3 out of 5 weeks, 60%. The last 5 weeks, he is dropping over 33 fantasy points, which is absolutely disgusting. Like, out of all the first round draft picks in your leagues, if you have Davante Adams right now, you are feeling the best. You really are, because he has been the most consistent over these past 5 weeks out of anybody that I've seen. Now, the remaining schedule for Davante Adams isn't the best, but I think this guy is matchup proof at this point. There's a lot of guys in the league that you can just confidently start on a week-to-week basis and expect, greatness out of them. This is one of those guys for sure. It's not even a question. You probably draft him in the first round, second round of your drafts, and feeling great about Davante Adams right now. Next up is another duo that I absolutely love, and week after week, they are consistently performing. DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, both of these guys This is another situation like the Cowboys, except it switched over to the wide receivers because Lockett and Metcalf are turning it on every single week. Past 5 weeks for DK Metcalf here, 17.5, 14.7, 13.1, 20.0, and then 26.7 against the Rams this week. Exactly what you want to see. As long as the Seahawks keep producing, keep putting up solid amount of points per game, Metcalf, Lockett, Geno Smith, all viable starters. And it's a sad thing that Kenneth Walker went down this week because he was trending in the right direction as well. Now you don't know, it's probably going to be DJ Dallas in the backfield, but those 3 guys specifically, I'd feel very confident riding throughout the playoffs. Next up is a guy that is just putting up unbelievable numbers for the amount of touches he's getting. We're talking about Christian Watson here. It is just absolutely unbelievable. He has 7 touchdowns in the last 4 games. Let me read off his fantasy points in PPR leagues. 32.7, 21.1, 21.0, and 24.4. And the miraculous thing for me is the most targets he's gotten in any of these games was in the first one when he scored 3 touchdowns. It was 8. Past 3 games, 6 targets. That efficiency, I don't know how in the world it can keep up, but it's keeping up. All right, it's keeping up for these 4 games. If I was a betting man, I wouldn't say it would keep up throughout your whole fantasy playoffs, but can you really bench Christian Watson right now? I mean, this is one of the hottest guys in the league. We're not talking about looks. We're talking about fantasy points, okay? He is just absolutely performing week in and week out. I don't even know what to say about it. All right, next up might be a little bit of a shocker, but he's performing every single week as long as somebody's not his quarterback. As long as Zach Wilson is not throwing to Garrett Wilson, he is performing on a crazy level. This past week against Minnesota, Garrett Wilson, 8 catches, 162 yards, 15 targets, 24.2 fantasy points. Last week, he had 26.4 fantasy points. If Mike White is throwing to Garrett Wilson, I am confident in starting him. His next couple of matchups as well throughout the playoffs, Buffalo, Detroit, Jacksonville, Seattle, they should be able to move the ball on these defenses. I can't lie to you, and I'm feeling very confident especially if he's getting over 10 targets, maybe towards 15 targets every... Forget about it. Garrett Wilson is going to be a stud in your fantasy playoffs if that continues. Next up on the list is more of a low-key type of guy, but he's increasing his value in PPR leagues week after week. And I've been seeing some of your comments down below, which you're not understanding the hype around Isaiah Pacheco, but I think he's pretty explosive. I've seen a lot of your guys' comments that are saying, you know, he's not as explosive as you think. Obviously, the Chiefs are a pass-first type of team, but, you know, we're going from 10.7 PPR fantasy points against the Chargers, then 15.6, then this past week against a top 10 run defense, the Cincinnati Bengals, 16.2. Also, Jerick McKinnon was performing in this game as well. So 2 fantasy running backs that are somewhat relevant. I'd obviously rather have Pacheco. They're going against the Denver Broncos in the next game, which is a tough matchup, but it's a team like the Chiefs. So if the Chiefs get up early, I can see them using Pacheco heavily in this next game, even the next couple, because then they play Houston, Seattle, and then Denver to end out the season. All games that they can run away with. Maybe not Seattle so much. They might be able to keep up a little bit because, you know, the Chiefs defense, it'll be a back and forth type of battle, but I'm liking what I'm seeing out of Pacheco. You guys can say it all you want in the comment section down below. Like, he's not explode. I still think he's a good player. I really do. And I think he's going to keep thriving throughout the fantasy playoffs. We'll have to see though. My opinion could obviously be wrong, but we'll just have to see. Next up is another guy that's just been on the hot streak of a lifetime. Until the fantasy playoffs, I want to see these matchups play out because it's going to be really tough for him. It's not like the beginning of the schedule. Josh Jacobs, the past 4 fantasy weeks, 22.6, 19.0, 48.3, and 21.0. The thing that you love about Josh Jacobs is the volume is ridiculous. The volume is absolutely ridiculous. He gets about 30 touches per game, whether it's through the air, whether it's on the ground, doesn't matter. This guy is a stud. Going against the Los Angeles Rams next week, the New England Patriots, which is a tough matchup. Then you get the Pittsburgh Steelers, not as bad on the ground as you would think. And then the San Francisco 49ers to end it out. I think that's one of the most brutal fantasy football schedules in the entire league. But if there's anybody that's going to overcome it, it could be Josh Jacobs. Not saying I think he will. I'm still leaning towards I think he's going to underperform his expectations, because his expectations right now are set so high. It's like at the ceiling. We're expecting this week, he was expected 25 fantasy points, the most out of any running back in the league. Underperformed it against the Los Angeles Chargers. So I don't know. That's up to you guys. I'd obviously still start him every single week of your fantasy playoffs. If he does bad, you just got to chalk it up and you got to say, you know, I had to start this guy at that moment. All right, and before we take off, we got some honorable mentions here. AJ Dillon recently turning it up against the Philadelphia Eagles and the Chicago Bears. 17.8 against the Eagles and then 20.9 fantasy points against the Chicago Bears. Aaron Jones is getting slung around like a rag doll here against the Chicago Bears. I don't know what they were doing. They were trying to kill this man with the way they were tackling him. It was absolutely crazy. He got bent backwards, you know, 3 or 4 times in this game, where I'm like, God damn, how did he even get up in that situation? That's why it's great to have AJ Dillon at least on your bench. He's in one of my leagues on a bench, and unfortunately I didn't start him, but 20.9 going forward. Is he going to keep getting more work? We'll have to monitor that, but if he's on your bench, at least I'd be feeling good about him going into the fantasy playoffs. Last but not least, any defense going up against the Houston Texans. The Cleveland Browns just dropped 30 fantasy points against this team. What did they have? 3 defensive touchdowns, 4 interceptions, 3 fumble recoveries, 8 sacks, something ridiculous like that. Every single week, the past 3 weeks, I've been going up against the Houston Texans defense just so I could first-handedly tell you how much they smacked me around. And you know what? Next week, I'm playing the guy with the Dallas Cowboys defense in my league. So I will tell you after they drop another 25 on my head exactly what happens next week. But if you guys enjoyed any of this content, make sure you're dropping that thumbs up, like I said at the beginning of the video, and also hitting that subscribe button if you did enjoy. I will catch you in the next video, everybody. Peace out and good luck in your week 14 and fantasy playoff matchups.